18-year-old Brittany Gargal had lived in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, all her life. Her family was big, and when her parents split when she was younger, they went on to create an even bigger one. Brittany now had 4 younger sisters who looked up to her a lot, as she had recently reconnected with her biological father after some years. They didn't skip a beat and were loving spending so much time together. Her friends said she was outspoken, never one to hold back her opinions. She was adventurous and enjoyed snowboarding, boating, and camping. Brittany was feisty with a great sense of humor and was never short of people that wanted to hang out with her. She was busy having just started back at school and had been saving money working 2 jobs. She wanted to finish school, go to college to study business, and then move into the hospitality industry. Authorities started piecing together the previous day. They already knew that she had been out in the evening, which narrowed down her time of death considerably. Brittany's friend, Atisha, was the first to come forward, and the pair had been close for years. Atisha said Brittany would come to her for advice, and when Atisha found out Brittany had dropped out of school, she was the person that encouraged her to go back and get her grades. On March 24th, Atisha had lent her some money for gas and asked her what her plans were. Brittany told her she was meeting up with a few friends and might go to a party. Natasha hugged her goodbye saying, "All right, girl, I'll see you soon." But she hadn't heard anything after that. The person she had been out drinking with, her best friend of many years, Cheyenne, was next to talk. The pair got close when Brittany found out about Cheyenne's tumultuous childhood and adolescence and became a big support for her. They were inseparable, spending most of their days together, and going out for drinks was something they did often. Their night began just after midnight, with Brittany uploading a selfie of the 2 of them before they left. Cheyenne told police they had gone to several places together in Brittany's car, starting off at Manchester's Brew Pub. Later they went to a house party, then headed across town to the Colonial Pub and Grill. But Cheyenne said the house party was heavy and, after they left, the night was hazy. She did vaguely remember something happening in the Colonial Pub and Grill that she worried might be behind what had happened to her friend. Brittany had started speaking to a random man at the bar, and the pair seemed to be hitting it off. Brittany asked him for a lighter and invited him to have drinks with them. Before Cheyenne could get to know him, Brittany and the man left. Brittany didn't say where they were going, and Cheyenne didn't get the man's name. She didn't even see what direction they had left in, or if they were on foot or driving in Brittany's car. All she could remember was that he was white and it was around 4 a.m. For some reason, Brittany had Cheyenne's phone, and Cheyenne had made her way back to visit her uncle, who corroborated her coming to see him by herself. Cheyenne couldn't offer up any more information, and what she had was blurry anyway. A few hours after she last saw her friend, a worried Cheyenne posted on Facebook, "Where are you? Haven't heard from you. Hope you made it home safe. Love ya." Officers needed to find this mystery man, but they had little to go on. It is unconfirmed where Brittany's car was found, but when it was covered in dust, dirt, dark marks on the side, and had long grass in the tires. Cheyenne's phone was in the car, seemingly confirming that Brittany had taken it as she had left, and maybe she and the man had driven somewhere rather than walked. Detectives checked the footage from the Colonial Pub and Grill, but they could not see Cheyenne or Brittany anywhere, and the bar had no recollection of them being there. However, it was a busy night, and it was possible that Cheyenne's timings were off. As Cheyenne's phone was found in Brittany's car, they hoped that the phone data could be analyzed to show other locations Brittany had gone to that night and fill in the gaps that Cheyenne couldn't. Cheyenne's phone had pinged at a McDonald's at 4:30 a.m., but she had made no mention of this. So, did Brittany go there after leaving the bar? Brittany's autopsy results finally came back, and it confirmed, as they suspected, that she had been strangled to death. They now felt confident that the belt found near her body was the murder weapon. Detectives kept trying to piece together Cheyenne's story, but they had a bad feeling in the back of their minds. Something about it was very off. Although it was entirely possible she had got things confused and her timings were wrong because she was intoxicated, there was just nothing to indicate they were ever in the Colonial Pub and Grill, a place Cheyenne was adamant they were, and the same place Brittany allegedly met this unknown mystery man. The months were passing by, and it was now September 2015. Investigators were still in the same place that they were back in March. People were still in shock and couldn't believe this had happened. Many a tribute was pouring in, including a big one from Cheyenne. They decided to go back to talk to Cheyenne's uncle again, and he was far more evasive than last time. But after some pushing, he suddenly had more to say. He told police that Cheyenne had said the pair had met two people in the bar that morning and gone back to a motel with them. The only thing she told him was that they were black males, whereas before she said Brittany was talking to a white male, but she said she couldn't remember their names, what they were wearing, or where the motel was. She said at the motel they were all smoking marijuana and an argument allegedly broke out over some cocaine. Cheyenne went to the bathroom. When she came back, she found Brittany dead on the bed with marks on her neck. She told her uncle that the two men had pulled a gun on her and forced her to cover up what they had done. Although they didn't believe this story for various reasons, Cheyenne was at least admitting she knew Brittany had been killed before she called the police to identify her. She had put herself at the scene and spoke of the marks on her neck. Cheyenne had racked up a long list of convictions and had over 50 since the age of 12. At this point, she was already in custody for another crime, so they could easily question her. The once so helpful and concerned friend that was happy to talk was suddenly quiet, uncooperative, and evasive. And when she didn't give them a thing, they had no choice but to leave. It was now over a year later and police were hitting a wall. They felt they had exhausted every witness and lead. Most CCTV had long since expired and didn't tell them anything anyway, and no one had anything else to offer up. They still only had one person of interest, Cheyenne. Investigators had been going through Brittany and Cheyenne's social media accounts with a fine-tooth comb, wondering if something was staring them in the face. A comment buried away or a message they hadn't seen. And then finally, they spotted something huge. In the tribute post Cheyenne had uploaded, the top half of the girls' outfits could clearly be seen. They realized that Cheyenne was wearing a belt that they recognized all too well. It was the same belt found by Brittany's body and what they now believed to be the murder weapon. The marks around her neck matched the weave of the belt exactly, and police said the marks on the car were consistent with coming from the belt. With this fresh information, the belt was sent for more thorough DNA testing. Experts found Cheyenne and Brittany's DNA on it. Authorities couldn't believe it, recognizing that if the photo had been taken at even a slightly different angle, this key piece of evidence would likely never have been linked to Cheyenne. It was still a complex case to build. They had no motive and Cheyenne wasn't giving them anything. Months became years, and it was now almost 2 years since Brittany had died. Finally, they got a tip from someone who hadn't yet spoken up. A friend of Cheyenne's had turned up at Brittany's parents' house with a shocking story. She said that Cheyenne had come to her house that very morning sometime after 5 a.m. She was very drunk and sobbing, and the friend described it as an alcohol-fueled rant. Cheyenne said that she and Brittany had gotten into what she described as a heated argument, something over a cell phone, but she didn't elaborate. Hysterically crying and shaking, Cheyenne said she had hit and choked Brittany to death with her belt. She pointed to something outside, and as the friend looked out, she saw Brittany's car parked up, with Brittany slumped against the window in the passenger seat, bleeding. Cheyenne didn't speak any more about the fight, what had caused it, or how it had escalated, but she made no mention of anyone else being there or a motel. Her friend was so shaken up she told Cheyenne to leave immediately, and she got back in the car and drunkenly sped off. But once Cheyenne sobered up the next morning, the friend said she had claimed she couldn't remember anything that had happened that night and had seemingly forgotten everything. The friend was too scared to report this to the police, but as time ticked by, they decided to give the information to the family. Cheyenne's uncle also later admitted she had asked him to go along with her story, and he had given her several false alibis. Police said that she had manipulated the story, made up random people, used her uncle, posted lies to Facebook, and spent 2 years taking no responsibility. If she felt as bad as she said over what she had done, she could have taken Brittany to hospital. Instead, she left her to die. In March 2017, Cheyenne Antoine was charged with second-degree murder and causing indignity to her body. With all the evidence against her, Cheyenne told them the same story she had told her friend that early morning. They were drinking and smoking a lot, and Cheyenne said after the house party is where her memory started to go. She said she vaguely remembered going to a McDonald's where the pair started arguing. They left and started walking when Brittany grabbed Cheyenne's phone. Cheyenne said she couldn't really remember how it had happened, but she remembered being livid and snapping. Everything went hazy and suddenly, Brittany was unconscious on the ground. At the age of 21, she finally appeared in court and faced Brittany's family for the first time. Cheyenne buried her head in her hands, crying and not looking at anyone. Under Canadian law, second-degree murder is generally a deliberate killing that occurs without planning but does not fall under any of the categories of first-degree murder. It can still carry a hefty sentence, however, with the minimum term starting at life in prison with 10 years to serve. Manslaughter is homicide committed without intent. Although there may have been an intention to cause harm, this carries no minimum sentence. Knowing this, Cheyenne's legal team announced that she was cutting a deal. She pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter, rather than go through a trial for second-degree murder. She said she would take responsibility for Brittany's death but had no memory of it. Therefore, manslaughter was appropriate. Through her lawyer, she said, "I will never forgive myself. Nothing I say or do will ever bring her back. I am very, very sorry. It shouldn't have ever happened." Her lawyer asked for sympathy considering the years of trauma her client had gone through. She didn't really have a relationship with her parents, had lost her mother young, and had a criminal record from the age of just 12 years old, racking up 54 convictions by the age of 19. Her memories of her parents were of them abusing drugs to escape the trauma that they had experienced as a result of Canada's infamous residential school system. Cheyenne had moved in with foster parents who had physically and sexually abused her, and her lawyer said she was sexually assaulted a month prior to Brittany's murder, which had significantly increased her drug and alcohol use. She was now using much harder substances like meth. But people said it had to be noted that, as awful as everything she had suffered through was, Brittany was somebody that had been there for her through thick and thin, helping her manage her feelings, regulate her emotions, and always being a shoulder to cry on. Brittany had been the one constant and support system in her life, the one person she always knew she could turn to. She would have done anything for her. She knows the family would like an explanation, a reason, but unfortunately she can't provide that, Cheyenne's lawyer said. Police and prosecutors say Cheyenne mentioned a cell phone potentially being the cause of the fight, but they know little else. Cheyenne has never said anything else about it, and whether she remembers or not, has blocked it out, or is intentionally keeping quiet, is still unknown. It will likely always be this way. 21-year-old Cheyenne was later sentenced to 7 years in prison, with a likely release date of 2024 or 2025. The judge said she needed to work a program in prison to help her with her addiction and anger. Honor your friend by becoming a positive, productive woman. You owe it to her to persevere, she said. There are still so many questions about what happened that night and why it ever did. One person claims they can't remember and the other can't talk at all. Brittany's aunt described the pain of losing a niece as profoundly dark and intense, and Christy, her stepmother, said Brittany's little sister feels guilty if a day goes by where she doesn't think about Brittany. She was just 5 years old at the time of her death and says she's worried that if she doesn't think about her, it means she's forgetting her. Brittany's father Everett said, "I feel so much anger and sadness about how short her life was. My life changed forever. I miss her so much." The day before she was killed, he was supposed to help fix something with her car, but he couldn't make it back in time. He said he thinks of this every day, knowing it could have been just one last time to hug her, and he was robbed of that. Saratoga, situated in Wood County, Wisconsin, is a city renowned for its association with Silicon Valley in the southeastern Bay Area. This affluent residential community is celebrated for its wineries, restaurants, and notable attractions such as Villa Montalvo, Mountain Winery, and Hackney Gardens. Saratoga not only offers welcoming neighborhoods and friendly communities, but also presents thriving industries and remarkable opportunities for growth. The city is home to several distinct neighborhoods, each possessing its own unique character and allure. In the northern region, you will find Brookview and Pride's Crossing, while the southwest is adorned with Blue Hills and Greenbrier. Congress Springs, on the other hand, graces the southwestern corner of Saratoga. However, amidst the splendor and charm of these vibrant communities, a heinous crime took place in 1984. A 73-year-old woman was tragically and brutally murdered in her own home, leaving investigators with scant evidence to work with. Eleanor Roberts, a beloved resident of Nakusa, Wood County, Wisconsin, was born on April 10, 1911. She was a cherished mother, wife, and grandmother, with her son Marshall Roberts residing close by in Saratoga. Known for her compassionate nature and her unwavering commitment to ensuring the happiness and well-being of those around her, Eleanor was a beloved member of the Saratoga community in which she resided in 1984. Unfortunately, tragedy struck when she least expected it, lurking just around the corner. The events that unfolded within the Roberts household on that fateful day, November 27, 1984, were undeniably chilling. Eleanor's brother grew concerned when she failed to meet him at an automobile dealership, where she had planned to purchase a car. He subsequently went to her home on South Hollywood Road in Saratoga. However, when Eleanor did not respond to his knocks on the door, he reached out to her son, Marshall Roberts. Unbeknownst to Marshall, he was about to encounter a scene of horror that would haunt him for the remainder of his days. Aware of a hidden key to his mother's house located outdoors, Marshall made his way to her Saratoga residence. Upon unlocking the door and stepping into the house, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. The atmosphere was heavy and an eerie silence filled the air. However, it wasn't until he reached the bathroom that he truly comprehended the gravity of the situation. As he opened the bathroom door, Marshall was confronted with a sight that he could never have anticipated. His mother, Eleanor Roberts, lay motionless on the floor, surrounded by her own blood. Shockingly, her head was concealed by a bath mat, which Marshall swiftly removed, only to be faced with an unimaginable scene, his mother's lifeless body bearing signs of violent trauma. In that moment, Marshall realized that he was standing in the midst of a crime scene, one that would forever alter the course of his life. Without hesitation, he dialed 911 and reported the tragic discovery to the police, providing them with the address. Within a matter of minutes, officers were dispatched to the scene. Soon after making the call, the Wood County Sheriff's Department detectives and forensic team personnel arrived, swiftly filling the premises. The forensic pathologist, who conducted the autopsy, determined that Eleanor's cause of death was a combination of blunt force trauma and multiple stab wounds, likely inflicted by a pair of scissors based on their shape and other factors. There were no indications of natural causes contributing to her demise, leading to the conclusion that her death was a result of homicide. As stated in the sheriff's office report, Eleanor had been brutally stabbed and beaten, sustaining broken ribs and punctured organs consistent with scissor wounds. Upon further investigation, authorities discovered that the only missing items from the house were a pair of scissors, a knife, and a telephone. Despite their efforts, the killer had left no discernible clues, leaving the authorities with a perplexing mystery to unravel. However, just as all hope appeared to be fading, a ray of light emerged in the form of a palm print discovered in the bathroom where Eleanor's body was located. The knife was found on Hillcrest Avenue in Saratoga on the same day, not far from Robert's South Hollywood Road residence. The scissors were located the following day, approximately 1.25 miles away, and the telephone was recovered 4 months later in March 1985 in the Wisconsin River, about 2.5 miles away. On the day of Eleanor's passing, an officer found a ski mask hanging from a tree branch opposite Eleanor's house. As stated in the criminal complaint, the mask seemed to have been tossed there. The mask, knife, scissors, and phone were all discovered along the same path. Investigators speculated that the potential suspect resided along this route. Further examination revealed that the evidence trail led to John A. Sarver, an employee at a store where Eleanor had previously bought a lawnmower. Sarver was initially interviewed on December 3, 1984, and mentioned spending time with another individual playing pool at Evergreen Lanes the day before Eleanor's demise. It was discovered that Eleanor had interacted with Sarver when she purchased a lawnmower from Compilation, where he was employed during the summer of 1984. The lawnmower required warranty repairs, which Sarver had carried out. When Eleanor lodged a complaint on May 1, 1985, Sarver was questioned again, confirming his last encounter with Eleanor in the summer of 1984 when he repaired the lawnmower she had bought. Following the identification of Sarver's palm print in the bathroom, he was interviewed once more. Sarver claimed his final interaction with her was in late summer, early fall 1984, aligning with other investigative findings. However, Sarver denied ever entering her home, raising questions about how his handprint ended up there. The other witness Sarver claimed to have been with during the murder was also interviewed. Although the witness couldn't recall all the details of that night, he stated that he never remembered playing pool with Sarver. During the interview, investigators discovered that Sarver had provided multiple alibis, none of which could be verified when they questioned the witnesses he claimed to be with. In fact, one of the witnesses Sarver mentioned confirmed to investigators that they were alone that evening. Throughout various interviews, Sarver gave inconsistent explanations of his whereabouts at the time of Eleanor's murder. None of his explanations or alibis could be substantiated by investigators. Another witness around the time of Eleanor's death informed investigators that Sarver was facing financial difficulties and had borrowed $2,000 from him. However, the witness stated that he was never repaid after the murder. In 2005, a confidential informant revealed to investigators that 17 years prior, Sarver had confessed to killing a woman by delivering a karate chop to her neck, which matched the injuries sustained by Eleanor. Several small claims cases were filed against Sarver since 2006 for unpaid bills, and another similar case was filed shortly after his arrest. Despite the mounting evidence against Sarver, the case eventually went cold. Lieutenant Robert Lewandowski, a retired investigator from the Wood County Sheriff's Office who worked on the case, mentioned that it often encountered obstacles throughout the years. Former Sheriff's investigator Jay Schroeder dedicated countless hours to organizing years' worth of information. Disagreements between investigators and prosecutors regarding the readiness to reopen the case were not uncommon, according to Lewandowski. For decades, the case remained unsolved, seemingly insurmountable. Nearly 30 years after the incident, in May 2013, investigators obtained a search warrant to collect DNA from John A. Sarver, who had long been considered a key suspect in the case following Eleanor's tragic death. Jerome C. Lippert, a retired business executive residing in the Pittsville area with a keen interest in local history and events, penned an article that was published in the Wisconsin Rapids Tribune on December 16, 2016, making a startling assertion. Not all law enforcement officers involved in the investigation should be commended. This revelation unraveled a narrative within a narrative. In the late 1980s, John Sarver worked as a civilian informant for the Wood County Drug Enforcement Unit under the guidance of Detective Brian Illingworth, also known as Big AI in the field. Illingworth, who later retired as a detective and former Wood County Sheriff, provided testimony during the trial. Despite his efforts to portray his collaboration with Sarver in a positive light, evidence presented in court indicated that the former sheriff had developed an overly close relationship with his informant. Notably, Sarver was not fingerprinted when he began his informant duties, a standard protocol that was only followed 2 years later by another officer. Moreover, Illingworth attended Sarver's wedding, a practice that was considered unusual. There were questions raised during the trial about Sarver being heavily intoxicated while under Illingworth's supervision, a clear violation of departmental regulations. In 1988, during the investigation into Eleanor Roberts' murder, a mysterious meeting occurred at a cabin in Adams County where Sarver and Illingworth were reportedly alone before other law enforcement officials arrived to interrogate Sarver. The contents of that private conversation, if any, have never been disclosed. Additionally, Lippert possessed crucial information that never surfaced during the trial. In the 1990s, a member of the Roberts family approached then-Sheriff Illingworth with a Reader's Digest article discussing advancements in DNA testing, hoping it could assist in their case. Regrettably, the sheriff responded insensitively, stating that the suspect was a friend of his and dismissively returned the magazine. This type of response is completely unacceptable from any law enforcement officer when a grieving family member seeks justice for their loved one. It is now evident that not all police officers involved in this case deserve commendation. This attitude or conflict may have contributed to the delay in achieving justice. Additionally, there was a peculiar incident towards the end of Sheriff Illingworth's career in Wood County that may be relevant. It is possible that some long-term residents recall Illingworth being admitted to a Rock County institution in 1997, reportedly due to depression and struggles with substance abuse. Initially concealed from the public, This information eventually came to light, leading Illingworth to decide against seeking re-election in 1998. He retired from law enforcement without much attention the following year. In that same article, Lippard also mentioned a primary suspect at the time, although he couldn't disclose the individual's name for obvious reasons. However, that person was Mr. Sarver. Lippard also suggested that the entire story was not being revealed, and indeed the trial confirmed the accuracy of his statement. He called for renewed interest in the case, prompting investigators to diligently pursue the killer of Eleanor Roberts. Wood County Sheriff's Officer Heiser stated, "Our initial step was to thoroughly examine all the evidence, meticulously review the 5,600 pages of reports compiled over the years, and subsequently meet with all the investigators who had previously worked on the case." Sarver, the accused, was 21 years old when Eleanor passed away. He was employed at a business that sold her a lawnmower and had visited her residence to service it. Initially, he denied ever entering Roberts' home when questioned by the authorities. However, investigators later discovered his palm print on the bathroom counter, contradicting his statement. In April 2020, a witness who had chosen to remain anonymous finally came forward after almost 4 decades of suppressing his memories out of fear. This witness confirmed that there were indeed 3 individuals present at the crime scene in 1984. During the trial, Mr. Sarver was described as a scary dude due to his connections with the police, which instilled fear in the witness and prevented him from speaking up. However, in 2020, he mustered the courage to share his painful memories, realizing that it was better to confront them before it was too late. His testimony was incredibly compelling, leaving the courtroom in complete silence. According to the complaint, the witness informed investigators that he had heard Sarver confess to breaking into Eleanor's house through the rear entrance with the intention of robbing her, resulting in her accidental death. The criminal complaint also highlights the department's persistent efforts to submit DNA samples for testing from 1988 until 2020, utilizing increasingly advanced techniques as they became available. Unfortunately, the case faced a setback in 2020 due to the global pandemic following the pressing of charges. The Wood County Sheriff's Office and Wisconsin Department of Justice jointly announced that on August 27, 2020, John A. Sarver, the primary suspect in this case from Port Edwards, Wisconsin, was apprehended in connection with the first-degree murder of 73-year-old Eleanor Roberts. If found guilty, Sarver, who had been detained with a $1 million cash bond, could potentially face a life sentence in prison. Sarver, through his legal representation, requested Wood County Circuit Judge Nicholas Brazitt Jr. to postpone the trial initially set for March 14, 2022. Despite the plea, Roberts' son and Assistant Wisconsin Attorney General, Annie J., acting as a special prosecutor, urged Judge Brazitt to maintain the trial dates as per the online court records. Sarver's legal team, consisting of Jeremy Meyer O'Day and Taylor Hart, expressed the need for additional time to conduct interviews with witnesses and conclude their investigation. Consequently, Judge Brazitt rescheduled the trial and set a hearing for updates on March 15, 2022. In November 2022, John Sarver was convicted of the murder of Eleanor Roberts. Due to the timing of the crime, the judge has no jurisdiction over Sarver's parole eligibility. Sarver is required to serve a minimum of 13 years and 4 months before being considered by the parole board. The parole commissioner must ensure that Sarver meets these 5 specific criteria before recommending parole: good behavior, completion of rehabilitation programs, reduced risk to the public, adequate time served, and an approved release plan. Judge Brazitt expressed his sentiments, stating, "He has had the opportunity to live a full life, to raise a family that maybe he shouldn't have had the opportunity to do. It's a good thing that he did it because there are good people in this world, but there isn't anything in my mind or heart that makes me think that he should have opportunities to get out there." The period between the murder and the arrest in 2020 was considered his parole, as stated in the reports. Wood County Sheriff Sean Becker mentioned that the arrest was the outcome of a collaborative investigation between the Sheriff's Department and the State Department of Justice, who will handle the prosecution of the case. During a press conference outside the Wood County Courthouse, Sheriff Becker described the homicide as a brutal crime that remained unsolved for an extended period. He acknowledged the frustrations experienced along the way, but emphasized that they never gave up. The prosecutors from the Wisconsin Department of Justice meticulously built their case, while the lead defense attorney diligently attempted to sow doubt. However, despite the defense's efforts, the overwhelming evidence led to an unsuccessful defense. Finally, on November 2, 2022, in Branch 2 Wood County Court, a guilty verdict was reached, marking the conclusion of the case on January 23, 2023. The sentencing of John A. Sarver for the first-degree murder of 73-year-old Eleanor Roberts brought justice to the case. This resolution serves as a significant accomplishment and a testament to the unwavering dedication and persistence of law enforcement officials. It provides closure to the victim's family and the community, reminding us that justice can prevail regardless of the passage of time. Timothy Thomas, 33, has been indicted by a local grand jury on charges of murder and burglary in connection with the cold case killing of Sebastian Oxenius, a Buchholz High School student that took place 13 years ago. The indictment was announced by Aliqua County Sheriff Emery Gainey and 8th Circuit State Attorney Brian Kramer during a news conference held on Monday, February 5th. On June 25, 2010, Sebastian Oxenius, who was only 16 years old at the time, was playing video games with a neighbor at his home in the Benwood subdivision of Gainesville. Tragically, while he was in the kitchen, he encountered a burglar who shot him multiple times. Sebastian's family immediately called 911, but unfortunately paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. During the press conference, Sebastian's brother Boris Oxenius expressed the family's hope for justice, stating, "We hope as a family that you can help us get to the final chapter of this, which is bringing my brother justice. He was only 16 years of age. His life was stolen." Investigators discovered that Timothy Thomas had used a car borrowed from a female friend during the time of the murder. Although they do not believe she had prior knowledge of Thomas's plans, Sheriff Gainey urged anyone with information to come forward. The woman is described as a 20-year-old Hispanic with a short, heavy build. The vehicle used by Thomas was identified as a white or cream Kia Sportage or a similar model. Sheriff Gainey acknowledged the long and challenging road ahead, assuring the community, "I know this has been a long and difficult road. We're making some progress, but we also understand it's not over yet. Rest assured we'll be with you every step of the way." In 2021, new evidence emerged that led to the identification of Timothy Thomas as a suspect in Sebastian Oxenius' murder. Currently serving a life sentence for the attempted murder of a Monroe County Sheriff's deputy in Stock Island, Florida. In 2015, Thomas has an extensive criminal record with 23 felony charges and 8 misdemeanors. He has faced multiple arrests by various law enforcement agencies for battery, burglary, and attempted murder throughout the state. These arrests range from the Key West Police Department to different Central Florida agencies. In 2015, Thomas was stopped by authorities in Monroe County for driving with a stolen license plate. A video presented during the press conference on Monday depicted a shootout between Thomas and the deputy, who was shot in the chest but fortunately saved by his bulletproof vest. On December 23rd, Thomas was formally charged by a grand jury in Aliqua County with 1 count of murder while engaged in trafficking and 1 count of armed burglary. The details of the indictment remain undisclosed as per court records. His arraignment took place on Monday morning at the Alachua County Courthouse, and he is currently being held at the Aliqua County Jail on a bail set at $1 million. Thomas's court-appointed public defender has requested to withdraw from the case, citing an undisclosed and irreconcilable conflict of interest. 19-year-old Maple Padalia was born near Mumbai in India before moving to Surrey in British Columbia with her family shortly after. Friends said she was warm and intelligent, ambitious and determined, a straight-A student with dreams of being a doctor. She was also very creative and was starting to make waves in the entertainment industry. As well as studying health and science, she was often picking up modeling and acting gigs. She landed a role in the 2010 movie Diary of a Wimpy Kid and filmed an episode of The Secret Circle, which was airing on the CW. She was already signed to a modeling agency and was over the moon when she found out she was a finalist in the Central City model search. The head of her agency said she was super intelligent, very articulate, very focused, and probably one of the most likable individuals you could ever meet. She had gained a place at Simon Fraser University and lived at home with her family and commuted. She hoped to go to medical school after she finished, but she also told friends she was enjoying riding the acting wave so much she didn't want to rule this out as a long-term career. Safe to say for someone so young, she was busy, but embracing all the challenges and opportunities that were coming her way and balancing them all well. Mabel had been in a 4-year, off-and-on relationship with 20-year-old Gajinder Dhaliwal, known to everyone as Gary. But their relationship finally came to an end in 2011 when Maple found out he had cheated on her. She was heartbroken about the betrayal, but she had enough to keep her busy, throwing herself into her work and her all-important studies. On the evening of September 27, 2011, Maple left her family home and headed to the campus library with a friend. They had a late-night study session planned and met up with a few more people there as well. As the hours ticked by into the next morning, they all decided to call it day. Maple hugged her friends goodbye and headed to her car, which was on the 3rd floor of the parking lot. Just minutes after 1 a.m., a resident across the street suddenly heard 7 loud bangs in quick succession. He ran to his window to see a white Dodge Charger screeching away. More people came running out onto the street, calling 911 as they did. Maple was lying on the ground near her car, surrounded by blood. She had been shot 5 times, 3 of which hit her in the stomach, and her head was covered in stab wounds and cut marks. A large bloody kitchen knife was lying nearby. She was still alive, but only just. Authorities, who had received dozens of calls about the gunshots already, were on scene within minutes. They worked on Maple long enough to make sure she was stable, and she was finally rushed to the local hospital. But her injuries were proved too severe and she died just a few hours later. It was such a frenzied attack made even more shocking as it happened in such an open, public, and despite the time of day, still fairly busy place. It was obvious from the cameras around the campus that many students were doing exactly the same thing as Maple that night. But despite how many people were around, there wasn't a single witness on the 3rd floor of the parking complex. The fear swept through the university campus, and the following day, 50 officers were working on the case. Investigators were keeping their cards close to their chest, although they didn't have as many as they would have liked. They said they didn't know if the attack was random or targeted. Maple's wallet had been found next to her and nothing had been taken, which seemed to rule a robbery out. They also said it seemed unlikely that the shooting was linked to gang violence, but they couldn't say anything with absolute certainty. They tried to reassure the students that they were still safe on campus, with one detective saying, "Other than the fact this homicide appears to have occurred adjacent to the Simon Fraser campus, we don't feel that the student body and leadership of the Simon Fraser University campus needs to be unduly alarmed." With his eyes filled with tears, the university spokesperson said they were making counseling available for anyone who felt they needed it and for as long as they did so. Vigils were held and the community grieved together. Maple's family said they could only think of one person that would have any reason to harm her: her ex-boyfriend, 20-year-old Gary. But to go as far as to kill her, it was a lot for them to contemplate. Being on and off since high school, the young couple had had their fair share of issues, but after their relationship came to its final end in the fall of 2011, Gary's behavior took an especially dark turn. Her family told police that a scary pattern of stalking and harassment had started. Between mid-August and late September of 2011, Gary made more than 2,000 calls to Maple and texted her even more than that. On one night when she was out at a club with a friend, he sent a total of 300 text messages. He started following her and having his friends follow her, keeping tabs on where she was and who she was with. He spat on one of Maple's friends outside a club and punched another one of her friends after he found out he and Maple were having coffee. After Maple tried to intervene, he pushed her to the floor. She called the police. He was arrested and ordered not to have any contact with her and was charged with assault. The friend he had punched was one of the friends that had been with Maple in the library that night. But with no witnesses and currently no evidence to suggest he was on campus that night, police had little to go on. But they did have one crucial piece of evidence. The resident that looked out of his window had got a perfect description of what they believed was the getaway car. He saw it speeding away at around 1:04 a.m. and he could tell them what street he saw it on too. Although the number plate could not be made out, they were able to work backwards using the cameras, and fortunately the university was well covered with almost 100 cameras and they were pretty good quality too. They started releasing parts of the footage and asking those on the tapes to come forward with anything they had, no matter how small. Looking at the rest of the videos, detectives could easily spot Maple in the library with her friends, smiling and laughing as she worked. But it didn't seem that anyone was watching or following her, and Maple appeared comfortable with where she was and who she was with. Just before 1 a.m., Maple and her 3 friends left the library together. Although there was no audio, everything still looked fine, and Maple seemed content walking with them. Staff at the university were able to identify everyone she was with that night, and they all voluntarily gave statements. Officers were happy to rule them all out as being involved. It seemed they had all parted ways, just minutes before she was shot. The camera on the 3rd floor parking lot was on a timer and set to pan around the whole area every couple of minutes, and, frustratingly, just as Maple entered the floor, the camera cut away from the entrance and they could see nothing. They could see the same white car had entered the parking lot just after 8 p.m. It circled around for ages before parking up, and as it finally did, Maple and her friend entered the frame. It was obvious that whoever was in the car was aware that Maple would be there that evening and was tracking her every move. This was not someone who happened to be there at the same time and took the opportunity. This was a carefully and meticulously planned murder. It was now 2012, and officers were still diligently working on Maple's case. They just didn't have enough to make any arrests. For months, the team took on the painstaking task of cross-referencing everyone that owned or had rented the same maker model of car in the area, interviewing and slowly ruling people out. Finally, in late 2012, they made a connection. The name Gursamar Beatty was linked to one of the cars. He was a close friend of Gary's, and a fellow student at the university. He had rented a white Dodge Charger on September 25, 2011, and returned it shortly after the 28th. When he picked the car up, he was with none other than Gary. 21-year-old Gursamar had also put the vehicle through a car wash within the hours after Maple was shot. Police managed to track down the car, and despite the cleaning, they found a shell casing under the hood that matched the shells found at the scene. On December 1, 2012, over a year since Maple was killed, authorities announced that they had made not 1, but 2 arrests. Maple's ex-boyfriend Gary was charged with first-degree murder, and his friend Gursamar was arrested and charged with second-degree murder and being an accessory after the fact. Gursamar had followed Maple's car for days before the murder, helped Gary flee the scene, put the vehicle through the car wash, and gave him an alibi for months. The gun used in the murder was never found. Gary was furious that Maple was moving on without him, socializing and having many a success come her way. Her life did not include him anymore, and for someone who was already jealous, insecure, and possessive, he felt if he couldn't have her, then no one could. Her family said he felt he could impose the relationship on her and take away the choice for her to want to leave, ultimately taking her life in the process. And before the trial was set to start in 2016, the now 26-year-old Gary would change his plea. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 21 years. The judge could choose a period between 10 and 25 years, and the prosecutor said it's probably the highest sentence given to someone convicted of killing one person as opposed to many people. 27-year-old Gursamar Beatty was later found not guilty of second-degree murder, but he was found guilty of being an accessory after the fact. He was sentenced to 22 months in prison, but 6 months before his sentence's scheduled end, he was released early. Maple's sister said, "That 18-month sentence was a slap in my family's face. He had the audacity to stay quiet. Even when the sentencing happened, he smirked at our family. He smirked at the people there in a way to imply that I got away with this." It took 5 years to get any form of justice for Maple and her family, and the devastating aftermath caused by her death is still felt in the Surrey area today. A documentary about Maple was released in 2017, which went on to win several awards at major festivals. The director Ghislaine Kaur wanted the film to serve as a memorial to her, but also as a way of shedding light on domestic violence. The Maple Badalia Memorial Scholarship for the Arts was set up, and provides one annual entrance to a South Asian Canadian female student beginning their journey in the world of art and design. 19-year-old Maple was already achieving so much, and with her determination and drive, there is no doubt she would have gone on to do many more amazing things in whatever career path she chose. One of Maple's friends reiterated this and described her death as like stomping on a flower before it bloomed. Her dad called her his most precious jewel, and said his life feels completely useless now. We're left with nothing, he said. We lost our angel and she's not going to come back. He said even though Maple was the baby of the family, she was always the glue that held everyone together. On January 5, 1997, Rosemary Pacenti, a 64-year-old schoolteacher, was enjoying her day off, relaxing in her apartment in the Bronx, New York City, USA. Little did she know what was about to unfold. The following day, on January 6, 1997, a concerned neighbor noticed that the lights in Rosemary's apartment had been on continuously since the night before. Worried, the neighbor decided to check on her in the evening. What she found upon entering the apartment was a sight that would stay with her forever: the lifeless body of Rosemary Pacenti lying in the kitchen. Shocked by the gruesome scene, the neighbor broke down in tears before alerting the authorities. The question remained, who could commit such a heinous act against a simple elderly schoolteacher? What could have been the motive behind this brutal murder? This tragic incident sheds light on the Bronx, a borough in New York City known for Co-op City, the largest cooperative-owned space in America, as well as landmarks like Yankee Stadium, the Bronx Zoo, and the New York Botanical Gardens. Despite its attractions, the Bronx has a darker side, being safer than only 14% of U.S. neighborhoods. The likelihood of falling victim to a violent crime in the Bronx is 1 in 128, making it a notably risky area. This grim reality brings us back to 1997 when Rosemary Pacenti met a tragic end in her own home. Born on July 28, 1932, Rosemary led a private life, never marrying and residing alone in Co-op City for 25 years while working as a dedicated school teacher. Despite leading a rather monotonous life, she would occasionally venture out to spend time with a select few neighbors whom she had befriended in the building. However, on Sunday, January 5, 1997, the cold weather in the Bronx compelled Rosemary to stay indoors. As the night passed and Monday morning, January 6, 1997, arrived, Rosemary failed to show up at the school where she worked. Her phone rang incessantly in her apartment, disturbing the otherwise silent atmosphere, but there was no response. One of Rosemary's neighbors noticed something peculiar. The lights in her apartment had remained on throughout the night. Filled with worry, the neighbor decided to check on Rosemary and arrived at her apartment at 6:15 p.m. However, upon reaching Rosemary's door, an unsettling feeling washed over her as she noticed it was slightly ajar. With trepidation, she cautiously entered, taking small steps, fearful of what she might discover. Unfortunately, her worst fears were realized as she entered the kitchen and came face to face with Rosemary's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. Overwhelmed by the gruesome scene, she let out a horrified scream before regaining her composure. Without delay, she immediately informed the authorities, prompting the arrival of Detective George Wood and Sergeant Curtis Oates from the New York Police Department to investigate the crime scene. Rosemary's body was drenched in blood, with a 9-inch knife still embedded in her back as she lay face down. The detectives observed the numerous stab wounds, indicating a painfully brutal demise. Additionally, they noticed that her throat had been slit and identified defensive wounds on Rosemary's right hand, suggesting a struggle with her assailant. Outside the apartment, in the building's lobby, further evidence supported their initial theory. Blood stains were discovered smeared along the wall adjacent to the elevator, yet no traces of blood were found inside the elevator itself. This led the detectives to search the building staircase, where on the 10th floor, they stumbled upon another trail of blood, further deepening the mystery. Detectives were of the belief that, amidst the struggle, Rosemary had managed to inflict a wound on her assailant. The blood discovered on the elevator wall and the staircase located 13 floors below Rosemary's apartment provided strong evidence that it belonged to the person responsible for her murder. Detectives concluded that the killer may have escaped the building by using the stairs. Although the bloodstains were significant in the investigation, they did not provide any clues as to the identity of the killer. Samples were collected and preserved for further testing and future use. Subsequently, an autopsy confirmed that Rosemary had been stabbed a total of 39 times, with 8 of the wounds located on her back. The knife, which was found lodged in her back, belonged to a set from her own kitchen. This led detectives to believe that Rosemary's murder was likely not premeditated. They theorized that the attacker initially did not intend to kill her when entering her apartment, but ultimately did so during the struggle. The missing items from the apartment suggested that robbery was the motive behind this tragic incident. A few days after the murder, a funeral was held for Rosemary at Granby Cemetery in Hartford County, Connecticut, USA. Her loved ones gathered to pay their respects as she was laid to rest. Despite the strong evidence and compelling theories, weeks and months passed without any new developments in the case. Detectives were struggling to come up with leads, leading the police department to eventually shift their focus to other cases, causing Rosemary's case to go cold. However, more than 2 years later, in May 1999, Detective Kevin Lawler from the New York Police Department was assigned to the cold case squad and given Rosemary's case. Upon reviewing the case, he devised a plan to move forward. With the assistance of Detective Mark Tebbins, the blood samples found at the crime scene were re-examined, resulting in the successful development of a DNA profile for Rosemary's killer. The DNA profile was submitted to the nationwide database of DNA profiles known as the Combined DNA Index System. 2 years later, on August 20th, 2001, Detective Lawler received a call from the New York Police Department Crime Lab regarding Rosemary's case. A match was finally found through the Combined DNA Index System, identifying the person as Charles Jones, a 28-year-old individual. Detective Lawler wasted no time and conducted a thorough investigation. He conducted a background check on Jones and discovered intriguing information. Initially, Jones was not connected to Rosemary's murder, however, due to his imprisonment for a robbery and assault of another resident of Co-op City on August 13, 1998. He was required to provide a DNA sample before his release on August 10, 2001. When Jones's DNA profile was uploaded to the Combined DNA Index System on August 20, 2001, it matched the sample belonging to Rosemary's killer. Additionally, Jones lived in Co-op City just a few blocks away from Rosemary's apartment at the time of the murder. While this strengthened the case against Jones, it was still insufficient to charge him. Detective Lawler recognized that although the blood sample evidence placed Charles Jones in the building during the murder, it did not place him inside Rosemary's apartment where the crime occurred. This gap in evidence was crucial for the case. Determined to gather more information and stronger evidence, Detective Lawler and his team decided to confront Jones. They attempted to locate him through his parole officer, only to discover that he was not at home and that his family was providing cover for him. The detectives left a message for Jones, stating that they wanted to discuss an outstanding traffic violation with him. A few days later, Jones took the bait and arrived at the precinct to discuss the alleged traffic violation. Jones was soon to discover the true reason behind his summons for questioning, making the next steps crucial. The detectives aimed to establish a comfortable atmosphere before confronting him. After half an hour of treating Jones kindly, the detectives proceeded with the interrogation. Despite Jones appearing nervous, he remained steadfast, prompting the detectives to introduce some unsettling facts to undermine his confidence. They informed him that the blood found in Rosemary's apartment belonged to him, providing sufficient evidence to link him to her murder. Upon hearing this revelation, Jones altered his story. The approach did not seem to yield the desired results. Detective Lawler realized that more needed to be done to break Jones and elicit a clear confession. He walked over to his desk, retrieved an envelope, and extracted a series of photographs. Placing them on the table in front of Jones, the images depicted Rosemary's lifeless body lying cold on her kitchen floor. Detective Lawler believed that this visual evidence might compel Jones to admit his guilt, but he was mistaken. Despite numerous attempts to coax the truth out of him, Tensions remained high and the detectives refused to let him go. The interrogation persisted for another 8 hours until Jones finally succumbed. He chose to confess to the murder and struck a deal for a reduced sentence by offering a straight 8, which means he would serve only 8 years in prison in exchange for a full confession. At this point, Jones realized that there was no escape from the consequences of his actions. He understood that he had to accept responsibility and endure the consequences. Fortunately, Jones made a wise decision. Instead of contesting the accusations, he provided Detective Lawler with a comprehensive confession, hoping it would aid him during his sentencing. According to Jones, the entire incident was a misunderstanding. He maintained that Rosemary had attacked him first. He had acted in self-defense. However, the detectives found something unsettling about this confession. Jones, who was 23 years old and nearly 6 feet tall at the time of the murder, claimed to have acted in self-defense against a 5'4" elderly woman. The story seemed implausible to the detectives, who were not convinced that Jones' actions were justified. Charles Jones was taken into custody on Friday, August 24, 2001, on charges of robbery and the murder of Rosemary Pacenti. Jones was warned that if he chose to challenge the charges in court and was found guilty, he could face a lengthy trial and potentially the death penalty. On January 11, 2002, Jones pleaded guilty to first-degree manslaughter in the Bronx County Courthouse and received a 19-year prison sentence. The arrest of Charles Jones brought a sense of closure to the community, particularly to Rosemary's neighbors. Belinda Bailey, a close friend of Rosemary's, expressed relief that the mystery surrounding her friend's murder had finally been solved after nearly 4 years of anguish. The use of DNA technology by the detectives was crucial in solving the case and providing closure to Rosemary's loved ones. Moving forward, the detectives are committed to utilizing this technology to solve other cold cases and bring justice to victims and their families. After leaving the school, an 11-year-old girl vanished from sight. This case has had numerous unexpected turns and strange facts for years, making it one of the most bizarre and mysterious in all of California. The story did not finish there, either, even though it took 45 years to discover the truth. We will explain what happened to Linda O'Keefe in this video, as well as the reasons why this investigation has drawn interest from millions of people worldwide. Born in Newport Beach, USA on May 24, 1962, Linda O'Keefe grew up in a large, close-knit family. Her mother worked as a seamstress, and her father was a machinist. Linda had 2 sisters, an older and a younger sister. Linda enjoyed drawing, playing the piano, and spending time in nature and with animals. On warm summer days, she took advantage of every opportunity to visit the beach, which was only 800 meters from her house. The girl was also a Girl Scout and went to summer school. Linda went there nearly every day in July 1973 when she was 11 years old. On July 6th, instead of her usual bicycle ride to school, she was given a ride by a piano teacher who lived a short distance away from the O'Keefe family. Linda called her mother from the school phone when classes ended, which was around 1:30 p.m. She was asking to be picked up because she did not have her bicycle with her that day. But the mother told her to walk even though it was only a little over 2 kilometers from school to home because she did not want to be distracted from her work. After speaking with her mother, Linda was not in the mood to walk. She even cried, and the school secretary considered giving her a ride home. But the woman needed to go the opposite direction, so she abandoned the idea. Linda left the school, sat outside for a while, and then headed home. Her route should have taken no more than half an hour, but the girl was clearly late. Her mother did not give it much thought at first. She assumed Linda had gone out for a walk with her friends, but as the hours went by, her concerns grew. Her mother made the decision at 6 o'clock in the evening to call all the people she knew whose kids lived close by and might have gone out with her daughter, but none of them had seen Linda that day. The family made the decision to start looking after her father got home from work. They made their way through the entire neighborhood, even the one Linda was meant to take on her way home from school. When it got dark outside and they were still unable to locate the girl, the parents decided to call the police. At that point, they believed the girl had resented her mother for not picking her up and was purposefully staying away from home. After receiving a report about a missing girl, officers started their search. Her mother stayed at home and called dozens of people who might have had a chance to see Linda, while her father and older sister ventured out in 2 cars to comb the neighborhood once more. All night long, the search went on. Using search dogs and helicopters, police combed the parks and streets, but their findings were equivocal. More police officers had been sent to join the search by morning, and local newspapers had already begun to cover the massive operation surrounding the 11-year-old girl's disappearance. 9 kilometers from Linda's house at around 10:30 a.m., a bicyclist, her friend, and some were riding through a park. They went there in order to observe the local wildlife for the botanical circle. After dismounting, the father and the child rode toward the ditches in hopes of seeing frogs, but there was more waiting for them. The man moved closer after spotting something bright in the grass and realizing it was a human body that was half submerged in water. Upon reading in the morning paper about a girl's disappearance and the police's all-night search for her, assumed the body belonged to her right away. The man and his friends quickly exited the park, hopped in their cars, and drove to the closest payphone to report their discovery. An officer who had participated in the search for Linda was encountered by them en route. After learning their story, the policeman reported it and went in the direction of the location. It did not take long for the investigators to identify the deceased as Linda O'Keefe. She was dressed in the identical clothes the girl had left for school, and her mother had made the outfit the girl was wearing. Her backpack was also lying next to her, but she did not have on any shoes and they were not discovered close to the body. After investigating the crime scene, detectives discovered tire tracks next to the body's location but no other clues. The cause of death was determined by medical examiners to be strangulation. It was concluded that the death happened between 2 a.m. and 11 p.m. Investigators deduced that Linda had most likely been kidnapped not long after she had left school, meaning that her abductor had likely held her captive for roughly 12 hours. In addition to being abused, the victim's body had DNA traces discovered by experts. Since DNA analysis had not yet been done in those years, they were given to the laboratory for safekeeping. After failing to find any solid leads, the investigators started searching for witnesses. Interviews were conducted with all of Linda's friends, school staff, and the people who lived on the streets where the girl was meant to walk home. It soon produced results. The girl's friends saw her on her way home from school and noticed something off. Linda was walking down the road when a turquoise van approached her, slowed down, and continued to drive alongside the girl. But her friend did not see anything else because Linda in the van vanished from her field of vision. Almost instantly, police were able to locate 2 additional witnesses. The 19-year-old girl and her mother were driving the car about 100 yards from Lynn to school when they noticed the girl speaking with the driver of the turquoise van that had stopped next to her. At approximately 1:15 p.m., the witnesses, who were familiar with the O'Keefe family from their neighborhood, were shocked to see Lynn chatting with an adult male on the street and decided to observe what was happening. Linda was standing directly in front of the van with its passenger door open. The girl entered the car at some point while she was reportedly conversing with the driver. The witnesses chose not to pay much attention to the van as it drove offshore thereafter. Since they were positive the girl would never get into a car with a stranger, they assumed Linda had been picked up by a relative or acquaintance. Investigators were able to get a rough description of the driver after questioning the girl and her mother. He was a white man, about 24 or 30 years old, with an elongated face and blonde, curly hair. Regretfully, the women were unable to recall the car's manufacturer or even the license plate number. Nevertheless, the 2 women's story was the only strong lead in the case. So based on what these witnesses had to say, investigators assembled an APB on the suspect and his vehicle. They were dispersed throughout California, but to no avail. The investigator had a few more conversations with the woman in the hopes that she would remember some more information. They even accepted an offer to undergo a hypnosis session at one point. It was only partially successful. The witnesses could remember a few more details about the suspect's vehicle, but they were all too little to lead to the murderer's location. The police soon located a second witness. Around 10:30 p.m., a neighbor who lived close to the scene of Linda's death heard a woman screaming. At first, she thought she heard someone yell, "Stop hurting me," but the voice ended suddenly. The witness might have heard it because the girl passed away at the same time. Later that morning, the detectives got another intriguing tip. This one concerned Linda's body. It was in that park that the artist was working on his painting. He started to watch what was happening and realized that something serious had happened when he noticed dozens of police cars. He once saw something that seemed strange to him. Was a young man in the park, observing from the bushes next to the police. The artist chose to ask him what was going on because he was standing fairly close to him. The young man said the police had located the girl's body, and he looked very concerned. Aside from that, neither the man nor the artist could see any details because they were sufficiently far from the scene of the body's discovery. How the man knew that they were looking at the body of a girl was a reasonable question for the detectives to ask. The man was characterized by the artist as a thin, white man with sideburns and blonde hair who was between the ages of 18 and 24. He stood at 180 centimeters tall. When the two witnesses described the van driver's appearance to the police, this description came pretty close. Investigators came to the conclusion that this man was the murderer as a result that he had decided to observe the police that morning. Finding the killer in the large city proved to be quite difficult, despite the police possessing a fairly detailed description of his appearance. But then something unexpected occurred 2 days later. They were approached by 18-year-old Peter Wooden, who admitted to the killing. The young man went to the same school as Cindy, the victim's elder sister, and lived close to the O'Keefe family. The town's residents were shocked when the news quickly spread throughout it. Police questioned the boy for 7 hours and searched his parents' house, not anticipating such unexpected developments. Following that, he was formally accused of murder. After 3 days, everyone was in for another shocking turn of events. Peter was declared free by the investigators after being exonerated of all charges. They claimed that the young man's confession contained far too many falsehoods and that the only times his story lined up with information that was published in the media were by coincidence. If not, he purposefully provided the investigators with false testimony that went against the actual evidence. Finally, the two witnesses who had seen Linda with the driver of the van were positive it was not Peter. Since they both lived close to the young man, the women knew him well and could recognize him right away. Consequently, the police deduced that the young man was merely attempting to make a name for himself by admitting to the crime of someone else. The man may have suffered from mental health issues, but he was unrelated to the murder. The investigators were left without a single good lead after that. They continued searching the entire town for the van and its driver, even enlisting the help of Linda's classmates. Children searched for that same turquoise van on their bikes while riding through the streets, despite police protests, but they were unable to locate it. Police interviewed 175 people during the first month of the investigation, searched every inch of the route from the school to the home, and requested assistance from the general public. They chose to make public a crude drawing of the van's driver a few weeks later, but that move also failed to produce any results. Detectives were not sure whether to pursue this at first because they thought the man would leave town, but as time went on, they needed to employ more and more resources in order to crack the case. The police had a new lead after 2 months. In the same neighborhood, there had been abuse of another girl. After dragging her into his van and taking her to a desolate location, an unidentified man released her. Despite discrepancies, investigators surmised right away that Linda's killer might have been responsible for the murder. The attacker's description of his appearance did not correspond with the information supplied by the witnesses in Linda's case, and he drove a white van. The detective soon had a lead on the suspect. The truck driver, who was 32 years old, was found to be guilty. Investigators came to the conclusion that this man had nothing to do with Linda's murder because witnesses claimed he did not resemble the man Linda was speaking to at all. Although investigators have continued to work on the case over the years, no noteworthy evidence has turned up since then. Authorities sent DNA samples from Linda's body to a lab in 2001, 28 years after the murder, in the hopes of obtaining a profile of the killer's DNA. However, the man was not included in the FBI database. This suggested that either it happened before they began collecting DNA from offenders or the murderer had not been charged in any prior criminal cases. Experts attempted, but were unsuccessful, to locate his next of kin in that database a few years later. However, the tools available for DNA analysis were far from what they are today, making it nearly impossible to do something similar in those years. Around the middle of 2010, there was a breakthrough in the field of forensics, which gave the police new tools for locating suspects. Not to be left behind, investigators in Linda's case also turned to a private lab known as Parabon in 2018. They sent detectives a picture of a man created using Linda's murderer's DNA. DNA phenotyping is an innovative technology that enables you to identify various physical characteristics of an individual based only on a small sample of their DNA. Experts assembled two portraits at the same time, implying the perpetrator's possible ages of 20 or 60. This portrait was surprisingly accurate to the testimonies of witnesses who had 45 years earlier seen the suspect alive. Investigators in Lindis did something no one had ever done before. In most cases, they would contact people who may have known the man and published portraits of him in the media to garner public attention. Exactly 45 years after the murder, on July 6, 2018, they shared a string of messages on Twitter on behalf of the victim. The final day of Linda's life was detailed in the sequence of 68 messages. The way the investigators presented this data made it seem as though she was telling the public directly what had happened to her on July 6, 1973. The story started in the morning with Linda narrating her day at school, her anger toward her mother for not picking her up in the car, and the girls' walk home. Detectives have meticulously chosen every detail from these messages to create the most accurate picture of the day. The last tweet in the series informs followers that there has been no progress in finding her killer. In response, the police have released a picture of the offender on the girl's behalf. 45 years later, I am able to talk again, and I have to tell you something important. The killer's face, which was found through the use of his DNA, is a new lead in my case. This technology did not exist in 1973, but it can now change everything. This strategy attracted a great deal of attention to Linda's case right away, all over the world. Police had previously posted details about past unresolved cases on social media, but a victim's account was unique. The murderer's own portrait served no purpose. The investigators needed to get as much attention as they could for these photos because if someone identified the subject and informed the police, would only aid in the case's resolution. They did a fantastic job at that. Over 7 million people saw this series of tweets in total. Detectives spent several months investigating the numerous tips and potential identities of the perpetrator that the police received, but they were never able to identify a credible suspect. They were not going to give up in the face of this, especially since Linda's case had attracted millions of attention. Once more, the investigators turned to Parabon, this time requesting that they attempt to use the killer's DNA to identify his relatives. While comparable efforts by forensic scientists have been made in the early 2000s, the required instruments were non-existent at the time. After nearly 20 years, things have changed. Investigators were able to identify the culprit thanks to the Parabon experts' successful search for relatives of the DNA's owner. The search for Linda's murderers started in August 2018, and it took investigators nearly 6 months to find any leads. They located the killer's third cousin by using private DNA databases. That essentially meant that detectives were one step closer to cracking the case. All they needed to do was look up the man's family tree and identify a suspect, but the Parabon experts did not stop looking until they made an unexpected finding. In one of the private databases, they discovered the murderer's personal DNA. He had willingly submitted his sample to a database where they could look up long-lost or distant ancestors. Later on, it was discovered that the man had received the unique genetic kit required to access the database from a member of his family. Police finally knew the identity of the murderer, James Allen Neal, 45 years later. Detectives visited the 72-year-old man who was living in a different state in January 2019. A private database would not have the credibility the court required, so they had to obtain a sample of the suspect's DNA before they could make an arrest. Police installed surveillance on Neal's property on January 29th and made arrangements with a garbage company to receive anything the suspect threw out. Following the acquisition of multiple items from which specialists could extract the DNA sample, Detectives dispatched them to the laboratory and stayed in close observation of James over the following 3 days. Sadly, forensics was unable to obtain a sample of the man's DNA, so the investigators had to look elsewhere for evidence. They soon got the chance. The police promptly gathered the evidence after observing the suspect smoking while seated in his car in the parking lot. He then threw the butt of his cigarette on the sidewalk before driving off. This time, scientists were able to take a DNA sample, and it precisely matched the murderer's DNA that was discovered on Linda's body. This implied that the culprit for whom they had been looking for nearly 50 years was James Needle. A few days later, detectives called a press conference to finally announce the suspect James Neal's arrest. James Neal was born in Chicago in 1946, and his family later relocated to California. His aggressive behavior was a result of his parents' frequent beatings, humiliations, and acts of violence against him. He started committing small-time crimes as a teenager at a young age, such as breaking into people's homes. Following that, he left school and made an effort to find employment, but he never stayed put for longer than a few months at a time. The man turned out to have a lengthy criminal past. He was arrested over a dozen times for theft, car theft, and robbery, among other offenses. Almost each time, he was released with little punishment and returned to his previous ways. James got married for the first time at the age of 25, and the two made their home in the Los Angeles suburbs. 2 years after they moved in, he killed Linda, and their house was a half-hour's drive from the city where she lived. The perpetrator was on probation for less serious crimes in another state at the time, and James' wife was expecting. Following that, he received numerous citations for theft and forging bank checks. He also briefly served time in jail for breaking the terms of his probation. James was apprehended by the authorities 3 more times for moving infractions after being released from prison. He divorced his first wife, with whom they had 2 daughters. He lived in different states for a while, but then returned to Colorado and married another woman in 1997. She had a child from her first marriage, and soon she and James had a daughter. Detectives who looked into the man's background discovered that although he may have been involved in numerous cases of child abuse, he was never prosecuted for his crimes. Neal approached 2 girls in his car and abducted them in 1995 and 2004. After mistreating them, he let them go. James remained free because he was never found guilty in either case. He was later suspected by police of at least 5 other similar incidents involving the kidnapping of girls from the street by an unidentified man in a car. A girl who attended James' church in 2010 lodged a complaint against him. She acknowledged that she had been molested for months by the man, who was 63 years old at the time. Neal admitted after all the victims reported multiple instances that were similar. All that followed was an inexplicable event. In some way, the victim withdrew her accusations, the case was quietly dropped, and the man avoided punishment. James went back to living his life as usual, staying out of the police's notice for the following 9 years until his arrest for Linda's murder. When asked if he had ever kidnapped the girls, the man denied any involvement. He claimed to have never seen Linda when shown a picture of her, saying that she reminded him of one of his daughters. In any case, the court ought to have found the suspect guilty because it was evident that his DNA was on the victim's body. Detectives made every effort to gather as much information as they could. They searched for evidence that James owned the turquoise van, but they were unable to locate any. But this was clarified very quickly. He worked in an apartment building and had access to the service van at the time of Linda's murder. Investigators discovered multiple hard drives containing the listed materials when searching his house. On his smartphone, there were also comparable images and videos. On his computer was also something intriguing. It transpired that James had researched the past of violent offenders apprehended via DNA testing. It seems that he was fully aware that the police could use DNA to connect him to a number of crimes. For the detectives, there was still another unexpected finding. James had Linda's name tattooed on his wrist following his examination prior to being placed in a cell. Investigators believed that he had done so as a memento of his victim. But as it happened, it was strange coincidence. The tattoo was obtained by James a long time prior to the murder, and the police verified this. The trial was scheduled to begin in February 2020, a year after the arrest of the pandemic caused it to be postponed. Although James persisted in claiming his innocence, investigators were convinced that he was the one who killed Linda. But a trial was never held in this case. James was hospitalized in May and passed away from lung cancer 2 days later. Prior to his arrest, he was unaware of this illness, and by the time it was discovered, it was too late to start treatment. And so, the 50-year-old case was finally closed. Investigators planned to continue looking into the possibility that James may have had numerous other victims. Linda's parents died before the culprit was apprehended by the authorities. Her mother, who declined to pick up the girl from school, blamed herself for everything that had happened to her during her life. Linda's sisters expressed their gratitude to the investigators for their perseverance and determination in solving the case. Their parents' passing before this day was the only thing they regretted. Jefferson Parish, Louisiana. It is vibrant, busy, and full of culture, with many a historic building, theaters, exhibitions, occasional festivals, lovely places to dine out, and plenty of places to shop. But it also has a quieter side, with serene nature walks to track down, peaceful rivers to boat, swim, and fish in, and some big state parks nearby. Those that live there say you can always feel a big sense of community spirit and everyone supports everyone. And today's case takes us here, back to 2022 when it was home to 54-year-old Yolanda and Dillion. Born and raised in New Orleans, Yolanda had been there all her life and told people she could never tire of it. She had a big presence in the local area and was always involved in something. Yolanda had worked as a budget analyst in the New Orleans Police Department for about 10 years. It was hard work and high pressure, but she enjoyed it and her colleagues loved her. They described her as quiet and humble, someone that did great work for the department and kept everything organized, but was never able to mention it or make anything about herself. They said although Yolanda was quieter, she had a cheeky sense of humor and was always positive, someone they felt comfortable to talk to and share their problems with. Yolanda's always optimistic nature was massively challenged when she was faced with the awful diagnosis of breast cancer. Ever the fighter, she took it all in her stride and everyone was elated when she got the news that she had beaten it. Yolanda took this as a sign to throw herself into more than ever and make sure she was doing everything she wanted to do and helping everyone she could. Having already got her bachelor's and master's in sociology, she was now working towards a PhD in it as well. She lived and cared for her mother, 83-year-old Edna, who was also sadly battling cancer. Yolanda was an only child, and after she lost her father Luther, she and Edna grew closer than ever. Caring for anyone is challenging, but Yolanda said she wouldn't have it any other way. However, with medical and school bills and debt mounting up, Yolanda needed a bit more money to make sure things were taken care of. She was strong in her faith and was a devoted church volunteer at St. Paul the Apostle Church, having been going there since she was a child. Another reason she wanted a bit of extra cash was to buy all the children there some Christmas presents. Edna said her daughter didn't have children of her own, but was a big kid at heart and loved spoiling the little ones at the church whenever she was there. Even though Yolanda had little time in her day, she decided she would start driving for Uber and Uber Eats to make up the extra money. Not wanting to worry her mother, she only told her half the story. She admitted to picking up and dropping off food, but knew if she said she was picking up passengers, Edna would worry. Her pastor said this was typical Yolanda, always asking others if they wanted help, but never wanting to bother anyone with her own stresses. She just kept it all to herself, and you would never know anything was wrong. With less than a couple of weeks before Christmas, she had started collecting gift bags for the children and was slowly filling them up. And on December the 8th, with a few hours spare, she picked up a shift with Uber. December 8th, 3:36 p.m., an employee at a local travel lodge in Harvey had seen something near the parking lot which instantly caught their attention. There were two people in the car and the person in the back was leaning over and into the person in the driver's seat. It looked so odd in fact that the employee tentatively walked over to see if everything was okay. But it wasn't. As they got closer, they could see a female in the driver's seat and a young man in the back. The woman was vomiting blood and choking. The man in the back then jumped out of the car, ignoring the employee who was running back and forth into the building, shouting at him to find out what was going on. The man pulled out his phone and started filming the car and the woman, a video he swiftly uploaded to Facebook. The employee was horrified and they called 911. They watched as the man walked away like nothing had happened. More people were now running over to try and help, but it was a really violent and gory scene. When authorities got there, they quickly realized that the driver was none other than Yolanda. She was slumped in her car with numerous stab wounds to her neck and back. She had lost a huge amount of blood and was barely holding on. They rushed her to the nearby hospital and shut the area off. Fortunately, inside the car they found her phone. Investigators contacted Uber trying to find out who she had last picked up and the journey she had taken. They needed to get the information quickly, but Uber said that until the fare had officially been closed on her end, as she was the driver, they couldn't give them anything. As frustrated officers continued trying to bypass the app and get through to Uber, Yolanda, who was now in hospital, was fighting for her life. But that fight soon came to an end. Her injuries were just too severe, and Yolanda Dillion died shortly after arriving. Detectives back at the travel lodge finally managed to work out how to close the trip, and with this, they got a name: Brandon Jacobs. They contacted Uber for more information on his accounts and to get his phone number. They then started circulating the information, hoping to track where he had gone. He was likely still armed and clearly very dangerous. The phone data was showing them that Brandon was still nearby, but they didn't realize just how close he actually was. To their shock, he was a guest at the very travel lodge he had just murdered Yolanda outside of. And what no one realized was that as they were out in the streets trying to find him, as soon as he stabbed Yolanda, he actually walked around the front and back up to his room. Just a couple of hours later, he came back down to smoke. As he lit up a cigarette outside, officers made their move and Brandon Jacobs was placed in handcuffs. He was being held without bond and police didn't have to interview him for long before he started talking. He admitted to everything and said it was actually completely planned out. Brandon had checked in a few days prior. He had been working in Seattle for the past 7 years as a software developer for Microsoft, but had recently taken leave and gone on to benefits. It is unconfirmed why he did this, but after he took leave, he started moving around a lot from Seattle, Washington, all the way through to New Orleans, where he was now. That morning, he said he had woken up and quite simply decided he was going to kill someone. He started Googling knives online and knife stores in the area. He then proceeded to order an Uber that took him to a store that sold knives. He told police that he had debated on killing this Uber driver, but realized he wouldn't be able to get back to the travel lodge, so he changed his plan. The driver dropped him off at the store where Brandon bought 2 knives and a sweatshirt. He used the sweatshirt to conceal the knives and ordered his second Uber of the day set to drop him back at the motel. And this Uber driver would be Yolanda. "How did you pick her?" Detectives asked the 29-year-old. "I didn't pick her. Uber picked her," he coldly said. The sheriff Joseph Lapinto said there was no rhyme, reason, or motive for his actions. It was just mindless violence. He said the interview was so shocking and void of emotion. Officers were searching for words, but there really were none. How could this have happened to someone like Yolanda, one of their own? Investigators have no idea about the ins and outs of what happened in the car or if any words were exchanged, but given where she was parked up and was found, they believe the second she pulled up to complete the trip, he just lunged over and stabbed her in the neck. Experts say this would have incapacitated her immediately. Unbelievably, the video Brandon filmed was available on Facebook until the police contacted the social media company asking that it be taken down. As the story started coming out, Edna gave a heartbreaking statement. Yolanda's cousin said, "Your faith has to pull you through and understanding that it was her time and the Lord wanted to call her home." Yolanda was dearly loved by so many and people were doing everything they could to help and support Edna during this time. The outpouring of grief and sadness was just as strong as the rage that everyone felt. Actor Wendell Pierce from The Wire urged people to remember Yolanda, saying they had attended church together for years and that she had a heart of gold. A fundraiser was set up raising over $17,000. People say she wouldn't have had any idea how much she had impacted and touched so many lives, and seeing so much love would have overwhelmed her. Uber themselves even released a statement saying, other drivers that worked with companies like Uber, amongst others, spoke out about their fears and feelings too, especially with driving at night. But Uber said it was committed to their drivers' safety and highlighted all of their safety features. These include an emergency button that, when activated, sends details to authorities and a requirement that riders using anonymous payment forms upload images of government IDs. A week before Christmas, Yolanda Dillion was laid to rest. Many were expecting a first-degree murder charge to be brought against Brandon based on his own admission of premeditation. But despite this, a grand jury would indict the 29-year-old on charges of second-degree murder. Months would pass, and because he was in and out of interviews and assessments about his mental state, he had not yet been arraigned. After much back and forth, in May 2023, it was announced that Brandon Jacobs was found not competent to stand trial. A series of court-appointed experts who had been assessing Brandon handed a report over to the judge, who decided he should be transferred from prison to a psychiatric hospital for further evaluation. How long this will take and what the outcome will be is anyone's guess, but it definitely will not be a quick process. For the friends and family of Yolanda, it was a huge blow, and they are now in limbo waiting for answers. Yolanda Dillion was a fighter and an inspiration. She was a hard worker and someone whose optimism couldn't be shaken even when faced with such difficult challenges. Her family hoped that everyone remembers her for her strength and her selflessness. Someone who, although she didn't realize it, brought so much to so many. While on a trip to Australia with her best friend, a 17-year-old girl suddenly vanished without a trace. The police and her family were left wondering what had happened to her for 18 years, despite the thorough search for her and the numerous witnesses that came forward. One shocking fact emerged when this terrible mystery was finally unraveled. The police had all the information they needed to wrap up the investigation quickly, but their carelessness and lack of professionalism caused it to take almost 2 decades. In today's video, I will narrate the story of what happened to Haley Dodd. Haley Dodd was born in the United Kingdom on the 30th of November, 1981 to Raymond and Margaret Dodd. She grew up in a fairly large, close-knit family with 5 other siblings. When Haley was younger, in the year 1990, she and her whole family immigrated to Australia, settling in the village of Mandorah. Throughout her elementary, middle, and high school, Haley Dodd was an excellent student. She participated in sports and had intentions to further her studies. She wanted to become either a veterinarian or a school teacher. However, before making a final choice for a career, Haley wanted to go on an adventure, exploring the whole of Australia. For this reason, at the age of 17, when she obtained her high school diploma, she and her best friend Lisa left on a trip to Western Australia. Their goal was to spend a few months away from home rather than just driving through nearby towns and tourist hotspots. The 2 friends planned to look for temporary jobs while traveling in order to pay for their living expenses, which included food and transportation. They planned to enjoy their vacation by hitchhiking within cities in Australia, which at the time didn't seem like a risky idea. 1 out of 100 young women were being killed while hitchhiking at the time, but given how many people did so safely, there was no widespread fear sparked by these crimes. Haley Dodd was certain that even with a friend by her side, her parents would forbid her from traveling by hitchhiking. She then assured them that she would be taking the bus instead. In July 1999, Haley and Lisa traveled to a place called Dangara. They already had a part-time job where they would work as day laborers on a nearby farm there. They were residing at a camping ground where they got a space to sleep for the night in exchange for a small fee. These camping grounds are very popular in Australia, primarily due to their low prices. A few days before starting work, Haley made the decision to use the rest of her free time to travel to a family friend's farm near Moora. She had once been there and wanted to visit them after a long time. She planned to hitchhike to the farm, but Lisa was reluctant to let her leave alone. Haley insisted that she need not worry and would return soon. As a parting gift, Lisa gave Haley herself the fence-folding knife and some cash so she could call her from the phone booth. On the 29th of July, at around 8 a.m., Haley left the camping site and headed towards the farm. Meanwhile, at the farm, family friends were expecting and waiting for her, but she never showed up. Being concerned, they decided to inform her mother. Margaret Dodd immediately called the police out of concern that something might have happened to her daughter. She first dialed the 000 emergency number and explained the situation at hand. After hearing her story, the operator concluded that there was nothing urgent about the situation. She, however, told Margaret to go file a missing person report at the nearby police station, which she did. Going through the timeline of events of that day, the detectives started looking for Haley. They started off by going to the campsite where Lisa was staying. After being told why they were there, Lisa was shocked to learn that Haley never made it to the farm. She was able to provide the police with a detailed description of each outfit Haley wore on that particular day, as well as a sketch of the earring Haley was wearing. She had purchased these earrings a few days prior to her disappearance. She was drawn to the piece of jewelry when she and Lisa went shopping to treat themselves to some inexpensive items. Haley had no idea that those earrings would hold the key to unlocking the terrible mystery of her disappearance at the time. Investigators released details regarding the missing teenager, including her description. Despite being almost 18-year-old, Haley appeared much younger. She stood at 152 centimeters tall and weighed a little over 40 pounds. As the investigation progresses, the first witness was easily found by the it happened to be the truck driver who had given her a ride that day. According to the man, Haley had reportedly knocked on his truck's window at a gas station and requested a ride to a place called Mora, where the farm was. Although the trucker was en route to another farm, he agreed to give her a ride for the majority of the distance. She was later dropped off by the man above 50 kilometers from Mora, close to the town of Ushinjira. He further reported that Haley had been in a cheerfully good spirits, talking about her trip the entire way. He had also given her $15 to get something to eat after she said she was running low on cash. In case she needed a ride back, he also left her his phone number. Since he traveled that road almost all the time, he wouldn't have minded giving her another ride. Detectives later received a number of calls from witnesses who claimed to have seen Haley in the vicinity. The police eventually came to the conclusion that Haley had been walking on foot along the northwest road towards Mora, based on the witness's testimony. Evidently, she was unable to hitch a ride from a driver at the gas station. As a result of that, she then made the decision to walk alongside the road in an effort to hitch a ride. Another witness claimed that he gave Haley a ride to the Wanjardi Road turnoff before she continued walking towards her destination. The following witness was a female driver who was passing by. She caught sight of Haley just as she was getting out of another car and walking towards Mora. More than 10 witnesses in total called the police. Detectives came to the conclusion that Haley was last seen at around 11:45 a.m. on the Northwest Road. About 50 kilometers from, however, there was another witness who, despite not having seen Haley, nonetheless told the police something unsettling. According to the man, his engine was overheating, so he stopped on the side of the Northwest Road. While fixing up his car, he briefly heard a dog barking before a female piercing scream. Since it might have been far away, he was unable to see the source of the noise. The road traveled through a barren, flat area with little background noise. Giving all of this information, the police's prognosis was disappointing from the onset. Eddie Rowe, the lead detective, decided that they should search for the body rather than think about the possibility that Haley might still be alive. However, management forbade him from doing so. Haley Dodd's case was left at the status of the missing person case. A murder investigation would have given the police more options than a missing person investigation, but they lacked any leads that could have helped them find Haley. So they started looking for potential kidnappers right away. They were able to locate several local suspects in a short period of time, but the police eventually concentrated on 3 men. One of them was a teacher at a nearby school. Another worked there as a part-time gardener, and the third lived close to where Haley had disappeared. Each of them offered an alibi and pleaded not guilty when questioned. Although the police were unable to find any evidence to the contrary, they were unable to conclude with certainty that they were innocent. However, things quickly changed drastically. A neighbor of one of the suspects went to the police. He revealed to them that on the day Haley Dodd went missing, Francis Work, a 43-year-old school gardener, had taken his car to go shopping in Mora. Around 1 p.m. later that day, Francis came back to his house and he noticed that inside the car had suffered damage. The dashboard had signs of an impact and the turn signal knob was broken as well. The neighbor was unable to ask him what had happened to the car because when Francis Work arrived home, He threw his shopping bags in the kitchen before mounting his motorcycle and leaving again. The police decided to re-interview Francis because they thought this story was strange. Francis, however, claimed that he was many miles away from the alleged location of Haley's abduction. He claimed that after getting home, he immediately rode his motorcycle to a party in the city of Perth. He said he wasn't able to make it down there because he went over the speed limit on the way there, which resulted in a serious accident that made him go to the hospital. With the information at their disposal, the detectives were able to ask the obvious question. Where was he going in such a hurry? Investigators decided to request a search warrant for his home after deciding that his own testimony was extremely strange. The police searched his home but were unable to uncover any possible evidence. Forensics also examined the car. They searched the car and took the seat's cover off in order to examine them properly in the lab. However, all these resulted in nothing and Francis' work was let off the hook. Not long after that, he moved to Queensland on the other side of the country, leaving the detectives without any leads while the case was left hanging on the shelf. Detectives made attempts to move the case forward by locating fresh witnesses and evidence, but all efforts were futile. After 8 long years, in 2007, Francis' work returned to the police radar. At that time, he was residing in a remote area of a small town. Next to his door lived an elderly couple who were relaxing one morning on their porch, when they suddenly became horrified to see a young woman running in their direction completely naked and covered in blood. When she requested for help, the couple immediately called the police. The victim claimed that the previous evening she had attempted to get a ride. A man pulled up in front of her and offered to take her to wherever she was going. During the journey, the man then informed her that he had to go to one location in order to fill up his car with gas. They later pulled up to a house in the middle of nowhere where he called her inside and offered her some tea, which sadly she didn't deny. He attacked her shortly after that and after a brief struggle, succeeded in taming and tying her up. The victim endured horrific violence and torture for the next few hours. Additionally, her attacker stole one of her earrings by ripping it off. This man was Francis' work, as you may have guessed. In the morning, the woman realized she could run once the rope was off her hands and her legs were free. She immediately started trying hard to loose the rope. After she succeeded, she watched out for Francis' work, waiting for him to get as far away as possible before dashing out through the back door. One smart move to note in the midst of this chaos was that the woman took off her necklace and threw it under the bed. Before leaving, she decided to leave some personal items in Francis' home out of concern that the police might not find any evidence to support her claim when she eventually reports him. And guess what? That single act of hers actually worked. After searching Francis' home, the police discovered the identical necklace and arrested him right away. After the trial, he quickly came to the conclusion that he could not get away with what he had done and made the decision to come clean. He then received a 12-year prison term. Although Francis' arrest was reported to the Western Australian police, who handled the Haley Dodds case, they showed no sign of interest whatsoever. The 8-year-old cold case, which so closely resembled the facts of Francis Wark's crime, was not revived by the police. The detectives only agreed to reopen the case at Haley's mother's insistence. However, they quickly came to the conclusion again that Francis was still innocent in the Haley Dodds case and that there was nothing they could do to change that. The police rebuffed Haley's family's repeated requests for a thorough investigation, saying that they had already done everything within their power. Haley's relatives spent tens of thousands of dollars on private investigators in a futile attempt to wait for law enforcement assistance. It was 6 long years before the case changed course. It was discovered in 2013 that the police had simply forgotten about the evidence, which ultimately proved to be the key to cracking the case. Tracy Horan, a medical examiner, submitted a request to reopen the Haley Dodds case. The reason was that the exact same car seat covers that had been taken from Francis' neighbor's vehicle in 1999 had been discovered in the evidence storage. Unexpectedly, it happened that for 14 years, no blood, DNA, or other forms of evidence had ever been tested on the seat covers. When the forensics went through the covers more thoroughly this time, they discovered a woman's earring that had become tangled in the material. Detectives went back to the drawings Lisa drew for the police shortly after her friend vanished. They came across the drawing of the earrings, Haley was wearing that day and were shocked to see that it was the same earring found in the covers of the car's seat. Experts also found a human hair that had been removed from the car's mats. DNA sample was taken from the hair, and it matched Haley Dodd's mother's DNA. That implied that the hair was almost certainly Haley's. However, the likelihood was not 100%, making it very challenging to bring charges against Frances as soon as possible. As soon as the information reached the media, the police came under heavy fire. This evidence was right under the investigators' noses for 14 years, but during that time they never remembered it. Naturally, such a discovery altered the course of the investigation, and the detectives traveled to another region of the country to question Frances once more. Frances Work was still serving a jail term at the time for assaulting a woman in 2007. He told the detectives the same story that he had told them 14 years earlier. He denied being involved in the murder and insisted that he was out shopping in Mora when Haley Dodd was kidnapped. The nearly 4-hour-long interrogation produced no results, so the police were forced to get the case ready for trial. He wasn't officially charged with Haley's murder until 2015, at which point he was deported to Western Australia. The trial started in late 2017. All of the evidence presented, according to France's defense, was circumstantial. His defense claimed that the earrings Haley Dodd purchased were both inexpensive and popular. Therefore, another woman might have left it in the car. Although not an exact match, the hair in the car showed a 100% match to Haley's DNA, though it would have been extremely unlikely to make a mistake here. That was sufficient for the attorneys, but the judge didn't find any of these arguments convincing. If Frances' crime from 2007 hadn't occurred, perhaps he would have still had a chance to escape punishment. However, he did more than just abducting the hitchhiking woman. He also stole her earring. The prosecution's theory that the man was hoarding the victim's earrings as trophies ultimately raised more questions about him. As a result, the judge sentenced him to 21 years in prison after finding him guilty of kidnapping and killing Haley Dodd. All of these occurred while his prior sentence was still being processed. Frances Work was sentenced at age 62, but the story did not end there. The jury was of the opinion that Frances abducted, killed, and then hid Haley's body, which was never discovered. Frances also refused to admit to his crimes. In 2018, Haley's mother worked to pass a new law that states murderers are not eligible for parole if they refuse to reveal the location of their victim's body. Haley's mother repeatedly asked the killer to reveal where he hid her daughter's body, but he refused. 2020 saw the occurrence of another notable occasion. Frances' appeal to have his sentence overturned was accepted by the court, and a new hearing was scheduled. His attorneys continued to argue that he would not have had time to abduct Haley Dodd between his trip to Mura and his return home. However, the court stated that the time span gave him well enough chance to do so, especially given the haste with which he arrived home and immediately left for Perth on his motorcycle. Even though the hair and the earring were still considered to be two of the most important pieces of evidence against him, Frances was still successful in having his sentence reduced. The court reduced his sentence from 21 years to 18 years after finding him guilty of involuntary manslaughter. But because of a law that was passed in 2018, he would still be unable to leave prison if he refused to say where he hid Haley Dodd's body. The detectives continue to be busy because of another aspect of the entire case. They are confident that Frances has victimized numerous additional women and that none of them have been able to escape his wicked ways. This psychotic man may have been offering pretentious rides to young women on the streets for years. Only he knows what happened to them. The disappearance of a woman in late 2005 was one of the most likely comparable cases. She had hitchhiked to another city and had vanished without a trace. Because Frances knew the victim personally, the detective in charge of the case is certain that he abducted her. But there is currently no evidence to pin him to the crime. It might turn up again in the police's evidence room a few years down the road, but that wouldn't matter to the criminal. Frances would have been charged for the murder of Haley Dodd in 1999 if the police had conducted a more thorough inspection of the car. We currently have no way of knowing how many lives he destroyed in the years that followed, but sooner or later, the mystery may be unraveled. This entire story has another unsettling aspect. Do you recall that the police named 3 main suspects, including Francis, during the preliminary stages of the investigation. 5 months after Haley Dodd vanished, one of the suspects killed his wife. The second, who worked as a teacher, ended up being among the worst child predators in Australian history. Unfortunately, the police were powerless to stop them at the time of Haley's murder, before they could harm someone else. Every day, murders go unsolved and eventually become cold cases. The victims' families wait for justice, which sometimes takes ages to come. While some perpetrators of these evil acts go on to commit more brutal murders, some repent and hope not to get caught. Recently, the families of unsolved murder victims have seen a glimmer of hope with the use of improved DNA technology, used to solve decades of cold cases. Here are 3 of the cold cases eventually solved with DNA in the 20s. Fawn Cox was 16 years old when she was raped, strangled, and eventually killed in her bedroom on the 26th of July, 1989. Fawn was a junior at Northeast High School and had been working as a cashier at Worlds of Fun, a Kansas City amusement park, until 11 p.m. that evening when her mother, Beverly, had picked her up and brought her home. Her family said she had gone straight to bed due to how exhausted she was. Fawn's younger sisters Amber and Felisa would often sleep upstairs with her, but on the night she was murdered, she was the only one in the room upstairs. While she was sleeping, someone snuck into the house through an upstairs window and raped and strangled her in her bed. There were semen stains left behind on the bed. By the next morning, when Fawn's alarm went off at the usual 9:30 a.m. to wake her up for work and she didn't turn it off, her mother and sister came upstairs to check up on her only to discover that she was still in bed but lying dead. Her family claimed to have not heard anything from downstairs. They said the sound of their loud air conditioner must have drowned out any noise coming from upstairs during the attack. Felly Seacox mentioned in an interview that, though the family dog got agitated at a point during the night of her sister's murder, but they attributed it to the dog being pregnant. Fawn, who was said to have just gotten her learner's permit 3 days before her murder, was a church lover. She attended church regularly with her family and she loved Amy Grant music. When she died, her father, John, took comfort in the family's faith. The murder of Fawn shook the whole of Kansas City. In August of that year, 3 teenagers were apprehended regarding her murder, but they were later released when DNA tests failed to conclusively link them to the crime. The police stayed on Fawn's case. They followed every lead, but got nowhere. The community and the family of Fawn Cox also refused to give up. Anytime there is an advancement in DNA testing, they would make sure the police used it in Fawn's case. At a point, the police were frustrated when a search of Combined DNA Index System, a database containing the DNA of every felon in the United States, failed to find a match. Fawn's family raised money and spoke to the media. They bought billboards that went up in Kansas City. They fought for years to get advanced DNA techniques used on the case. They held fundraisers, even offering to pay for it themselves, as the Kansas City police could not afford it. Eventually, the FBI paid for a genealogy DNA testing, and on the 11th of November 2020, after narrowing down their list of suspects, the police finally revealed Donald Cox Jr., Fawn's cousin, who was 5 years older than her as the murderer. Unfortunately, justice could not be truly served as he had died of a drug overdose in 2006. To further prove that Donald Cox Jr. was the murderer they had wanted for decades, the investigators who had worked on Donald's death investigation had retained his blood sample during his case because they had sensed foul play in the circumstances surrounding his death. They then compared DNA from the blood sample with a DNA profile from the bodily fluids recovered from Fawn's bedroom in 1989 and discovered a match. Fawn's parents, who now have closure to the case, were sad but relieved. They said they had sometimes wondered if Donald had killed her. It turned out that their suspicion was right all along. Mary Ann Perez was a single mother living in Chalmette, Louisiana. On the 25th of March, 1976, Mary Ann left her home to go to a country western bar on the outskirts of New Orleans where she would meet up with friends of hers. Mary Ann left her eldest daughter in charge of the youngest children. She told them that she would call them at 11 p.m. At 11 p.m., she did call her oldest daughter and informed her that she would be home soon. The children waited. but there was no sign of Mary. And then, at 1:30 a.m., they received a call from a woman who claimed her name was Dorothy. Dorothy told them she was a friend of Mary Ann's and that Mary Ann was having car trouble, but she would be home soon. Mary Ann never made it back home and the police were called. They went to the bar for any information as to where Mary Ann could be. They found her car in front of the bar, still in perfect condition. Investigators also spoke to her family and found it worrying that Mary Ann had no friend named Dorothy. 3 days after she was last seen, her purse was found about 10 miles from the bar, in a lake. It had been weighed down by a brick. There was not much else to go on, so the case went cold. That was until 9 years later in 1985. New Orleans detectives were sent to Kansas because a man confessed to ending the life of Mary Ann. The man's name is David Courtney. He claimed that he and his wife abducted Mary Ann before ending her life. He said that one night he was driving along the highway and then stopped at a country western bar in New Orleans. He noticed an intoxicated woman that couldn't unlock her car. David offered this woman a ride, which she finally accepted. While driving, she told him that her name was Mary Ann. He confessed to strangling her and then dumping her body near the Mississippi-Louisiana border. The police searched the entire area but found nothing. This led her family to believe that Mary Ann might still be alive. What also helped the family keep their hopes up was that Mary Ann's daughter-in-law received a phone call from a woman in 1990. The woman claimed that she was Mary Ann's best friend and that the two of them were being held captive and were not allowed to call again. Mary Ann's family believed that David was not successful in strangling Mary Ann, while the police believed he was and that David merely misremembered the location where he put her. It would be another few decades before we would learn what really happened to Mary Ann. In December of 2017, the police announced they believed they solved the case. This is what they had to say. In November of 1976, 8 months after Mary Ann disappeared, skeletal remains were found in a cornfield in Alabama just over the Mississippi border. It took 2 different police departments to solve this case. One police department knew about the disappearance of Mary, and the other knew about the skeletal remains that were found. Mary Ann had a partial dental plate on her upper front teeth, the same as the Jane Doe that was found. The police went to Oklahoma where the body was being stored in a warehouse and took DNA samples. They then took DNA samples from one of Mary Ann's daughters. In November of 2018, the DNA tests positively identified it as belonging to Mary Ann. Investigators still believe that David Courtney's confession is true. He is currently serving a life sentence. Carla Jen Walker was born on January 31st of 1957 in Fort Worth, Texas. She was a 17-year-old cheerleader and student who was kidnapped out of her boyfriend's passenger seat on the 16th of February, 1974. Carla and her boyfriend, Rodney McCoy, were sitting and waiting for friends in his car in the parking lot of Brunswick Ridgely Bowl. After attending a Valentine's Dance Week at Western Hills High School when suddenly, the car door swung open and the two were attacked and assaulted by an unknown person who mistakenly dropped the magazine from his gun during the attack. While trying to fight off the bad guy, McCoy was knocked into unconsciousness with the back of a pistol. When he woke up later, he discovered Carla was gone and the last thing he remembered was her shouting, "Rodney, go get my dad." McCoy then went to Carla's house to tell her parents what had transpired. They called the police who searched the area where she had been kidnapped. Her purse and the magazine clip the attacker left behind were the only items recovered in the parking lot. Several days later, on February 20th, 1974, Carla's body was found in a drainage culvert at Benbrook Lake. According to autopsy results, she had been alive for 2 days after her abduction and she had also been beaten, raped, injected with morphine, tortured, and strangled to death. The police were said to have quite a number of suspects on their list during the first phase of investigation. One man named Glenn Samuel McCurley was questioned shortly after Carla's murder in 1974 because the gun magazine found in the parking lot of the bowling alley was tied to him. Apparently, he had recently purchased a pistol that used the same magazine as the one found on the crime scene. However, McCurley told investigators that his gun was stolen from his truck. After taking and passing a polygraph test, he was let off the hook. At this point, there was nothing tying him to the murder. The police, who desperately wanted answers, had obtained evidence of semen and other bodily fluids from the crime scene. They had also preserved Carla's clothing for further investigation, but due to lack of advanced technology in the 1970s, the killer could not be identified. Hence, the murder remained a cold case for 46 years until in September 2020, when the police got DNA samples from the trash can outside McCurley's home. After confirming that the samples matched the DNA evidence gotten from the crime scene in 1974, investigators returned to McCurley's home, where he invited them in for a talk. He repeated the same story he told the police in 1974. He claimed not to have killed anyone and said he never knew Carla Jan Walker. Investigators then asked him for a DNA sample, to which he agreed and signed a consent form. They took 2 chick swabs and sent them alongside with Carla's clothing for analysis. They were sent to Othram Incorporated, a lab that specializes in advanced testing of small and degraded DNA. They ended up developing a full DNA profile of the perpetrator. 6 days later, the swabs gotten from McCurley matched the DNA found on Carla's bra. This was enough to arrest and charge McCurley with capital murder. In August 2021, McCurley started his trial. The evidence presented in court included the pistol he had claimed was stolen in 1974. The pistol was found carefully hidden inside his home. By the 3rd day of his trial, McCurley pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. He is currently imprisoned in Gibb Lewis Unit and will be eligible for parole on the 21st of March, 2029. As of the time of making this video, he still maintains his innocence. He once told a reporter that he pled guilty because he had had enough hounding. Finally arrested, Jim Walker, Carla's younger brother, is glad that the family eventually has a face to the gruesome murder of his sister. Jim, who became a police officer nearly 45 years ago after his sister was killed, said their parents had both died without seeing the killer, but he was able to fulfill the pledge he made to his mother. Tamara Milligrad lived in Newport, southwest of Melbourne in Australia. In September of 1971, she asked her parents if she could go to the Royal Melbourne Show along with one of her friends from school. Her parents were a little hesitant at first, since she was only 15 years old, but they agreed since they assumed she would be back on the same day. The Royal Melbourne Show is an event that started in 1848. Each year there are a lot of incredible sights, and there are also a lot of rides and other forms of entertainment. It was on September 18, 1971 that Tamara and her friend went to the show. At one point Tamara told her friend that she needed some change for the $5 she had in her pocket, so they separated. After a while, Tamara's friend went to look for her when she did not return. Her friend got worried when she could not find her. The friend then called Tamara's parents, who called the police. They informed the police that their daughter went to the Royal Melbourne Show and could not be found. The police learned from her parents that Tamara had a huge argument with her parents about the boyfriend she had at the time of her disappearance. Some of her friends also came forward telling the police that Tamara would often tell them she wanted to start a new life. This made the police believe that Tamara was not abducted, but that she had actually ran away. Nevertheless, her family decided that they would not give up and that they would continue the search for her. One of Tamara's brothers, named Nick, said that they were always on wild goose chases trying to find her. They even hired a personal investigator. And over the years, there were a few supposed sightings of Tamara. One was at the Tarmac Hotel in Laverton. Another was that she had even slept at the Royal Melbourne Show for 2 nights before leaving Street Kilda and getting a job. But none of these were ever confirmed. 17 years after Tamara went missing, her father passed away. In his last moments, he begged his family never to stop searching for Tamara. In 2010, the police decided to reopen the case thanks to Tamara's mother, who is now 85 years old. This was 39 years after Tamara went missing. She would be in her 50s. The family and police still believed that she ran away. Back in the 1970s, it was pretty simple to do. You could just move to a different part of the country, marry, and then you had a new life. In 2010, the disappearance of Tamara Milligrad was featured in the Missing Persons Week in Melbourne. One of the women that looked at this site and saw the photo of Tamara knew Tamara as her mother, who had a different name. The woman who looked on the site was Karina Russell. She had lost her mother in a car accident. She and her sibling were very young when they lost their mom in 1976. Her mom's name was Pauline Tammy Russell, but she really looked like Tamara Milligrad. Karina decided to get in touch with the National Missing Persons Coordination Center to try to see if the woman in the photo could be her very own mom. DNA was taken from one of Tamara's brothers and was matched to the DNA of Karina. Now, 44 long years after Tamara disappeared, her family finally knew what happened. She left her family, moved to a different area in Victoria, Australia. She then changed her age from 15 to 18 and changed her name to Pauline Tammy Russell and had 2 kids before passing away in a car crash. For Tamara's mother, Luba, it was heartbreaking to learn that her daughter was not alive anymore. On the other hand, she was happy to finally know what had happened and also welcome her 2 grandchildren into her life. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.